The enemy emerged from the tree line and marched towards Gunner O'Halloran's concealed position. Many of the nearly 1,000 soldiers stood over 6 feet high. They were strong and fast, and they'd ravaged Western Australian farms and ranches for hundreds of miles. O'Halloran tightened his grip on his Lewis machine gun. The enemy's soldiers were within range, but he didn't fire. Previous skirmishes had taught him to be patient, and he wanted to take down as many of the long-legged monstrosities as possible. Finally, when they were within 100 yards, he pulled the trigger. The first volley took down about 12 combatants, but then the unthinkable happened. The Lewis gun jammed. O'Halloran's men struggled to frantically get the gun back in action, but it was too late. At that moment, the men saw their lives flash before their eyes, only for a blanket of black and gray feathers to be left in the wake of their battlefield. And that was the story of the second skirmish of the Great Emu War of 1932. So how did we get here? Well, first we have to talk about the rabbit-proof fence. It's the year of our Lord 1859. It's Christmas, and a man named Thomas Austin has just entered the picture. If you know anything about Thomas Austin, which I'm assuming you don't because who the fuck is that guy? He's a wealthy British settler, which already raises a few red flags. As a side note, generally when you look at old events, the dates are pretty vague. Like, it'll say some shit like the spring of 1799. But whenever there is an actual date, like Christmas, 1859, it's usually not a good sign. Like, they're not forgetting that shit anytime soon. This is surely the worst Christmas ever. He decided to introduce between 12 and 24, with conflicting reports, rabbits into Australia. His quote was, "The introduction of a few rabbits could do little harm and might provide a touch of home in addition to a spot of hunting. With no local predators and an ideal biome for rabbits, they bred rapidly. It's currently estimated that there are around 200 million of those rabbits in Australia now." Thanks, Thomas. So by 1887, the Australian government posted a bounty of £25,000, or about 1.8 million freedom dollars today, for any way that they could create a method of success not previously known in the colony for the effectual extermination of rabbits. They tried a whole bunch of different methods. They tried fucking stomping out their burrows. They tried just shooting them. They tried to introduce a plague into the rabbits, which they quickly gained immunity for. So they tried it with a second virus, and they gained immunity to that too. Isn't that fun? What do we do when we can't exterminate the rabbits? Obviously, we build the longest single-line fence in history. To help build the fence, they used camels. They used a bunch of camels, like 350 camels. I didn't know that they had camels in Australia. Evidently, Australia has the largest feral camel population on Earth. Like, they have over 1 million camels. There's a herd out there of over 750,000 camels. That's a lot of fucking camels. There's a part of their Wikipedia page that just says camels go feral. Also, they do camel racing. You haven't heard of the Camel Cup? The camels deserve their own fucking video. There are so many camels in Australia, they have to perform camel genocides. I mean, they come after camels with helicopters with sharpshooters in them like fucking Ghost Recon. They go fucking crazy. You gotta read about these fucking camels. This is a very educational video. Be sure to subscribe for more educational content. If you put me in a room with Hitler, Stuart Little, and one bullet, but back on track. By the time the fence was completed in 1907, it was 1,139 miles long, making it the longest single-line fence on Earth. Isn't that fun? Initially in 1901, it was being constructed by private contractors, but then in 1904, it was taken over by the Australian government. So during construction, they found that the rabbits were already on the other side of the fence. So they decided to supply the farmers with netting to help catch the rabbits. And then they built a second fence. And the second fence seemed pretty good. So then they decided to stop supplying the farmers with netting. But then the second fence stopped working, so they decided to build a third fence. And then the third fence worked pretty good, so they kind of just called it there. And then, the rabbits stopped being so much of a problem. So in the end, it took them 3 fences, but the fences were pretty effective against the rabbits. But you know what they aren't effective against? Giant fucking birds. Emus are already native to Australia, so we don't have a horror story of a rich old white guy for this one. Emus usually breed in the drier areas of Australia, and then they migrate to wherever they can find food and water. They don't really have a predestined migration path like deer or birds. So this year, they decided to go to the Campion region of Australia. That's where the farmers were. It's where the farmers with the rabbits. That's them. But part of the problem was that along with the rabbit problem, because the rabbit problem hadn't actually stopped, the fence had just kind of slowed it down. They were also experiencing a pretty heavy drought at the time. So the emus were a fucking problem. But much like the rabbits, the farmers asked the government for help. And if we learned anything about asking the government for help from our previous video, the farmers were reporting the emus were causing significant damage to their land. So in response, the Minister of Defense decided to deploy a military unit with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. This is also the part where we learn that they had done this to be used as a PR stunt to prove to the farmers that they were actually doing something. So they sent a cinematographer with the military, and that's why there's so much actual evidence of this. So the first attempt was in November of 1932. The first attempt, the emus were a lot faster than they anticipated. So whenever they would find a herd of emus to fire upon, they would just scatter, which was described as using guerrilla tactics. And the Lewis machine guns that they were supplied with would just jam constantly. So by the time that they would unjam them, the emus would just be gone. It is worth noting that an emu can run at like 45 kilometers an hour. You are fast, but Big Bird is faster. In the second attempt later in the month, they decided that they were just gonna use more bullets, and then they tried to mount the guns to the back of trucks. But they just ran into the same problems. The second attempt was a little bit more effective because of the drought. The emus would have to gather in larger numbers to take advantage of any adequate water source. Because the situation, if you weren't a farmer, was kind of comical, and it was dubbed the Emu War, it made international headlines with shit like, "Emus outwit soldiers." There were also newspaper reports that the emus would trample 100 plants for every one they consumed. Also, this one mentions an emu-proof fence, but we've talked enough about fences today, so I'm just going to move on. It was reported by the man who led the operation, Major G.P.W. Meredith? Yes. The actual number was 986 emus killed and 9,860 rounds of ammunition consumed. Now, that's sus. That's a sus as fuck report. That's not real. That's not real. Now, I don't have any evidence that it's not, but I got a gut feeling. I got a feeling in my bones that he is a fucking liar. The Emu War continued for a long time. Some would argue that it is still going on today. However, the farmers found that using a rifle and taking care of the emus themselves was the most effective method. Around 284,000 emus were killed between 1945 and 1960 by the farmers alone. But even with all of my dedicated research here, I still have some questions. So I went to the only place that I knew where I could get some. Allie and I got into the Beetle and we went to Hot Springs, Arkansas. We had a good lunch where I spilled tartar sauce all over my shorts. I did not piss myself. It was tartar sauce. And then I went to the bathroom to try to clean the tartar sauce off. But then when I got out of the bathroom, it looked like I pissed myself even more. So I stood in front of a fan. And that was all before we went to the alligator farm, which is the reason that we were going there in the first place.
Hold on to that ticket. You'll use that in the building, okay?
You're gonna lose it. Let me have it.
We were having a great time at the alligator farm when we finally got there. We were feeding the alligators and looking at the alligators. There were a whole bunch of alligators. I even got to hold an alligator. We got to play with the goats, and they even had a merman. Look at him. Ain't he wacky? I guess it was a pretty slow day at the alligator farm, so because the employee gave us like a really long-winded tour, and we got to watch her feed the birds by hand, which was pretty cool. We walked around for a while in the alligator farm, and we saw a big turtle and a donkey and some rabbits. But then, at the end of the row, at the end of the alligator farm petting zoo section, I saw it. His tall, horrible neck and his beady, soulless eyes stared back at me like the monster it was. A cold-blooded master of guerrilla tactics with a heart of stone. This was clearly not a creature to be trifled with. If they were able to defeat an entire Australian militia in only hand-to-hand combat, what could these two units do to me? A 5'6" Jewish boy. The only thing holding back my merciless slaughter at that moment was a chain-link fence. Staring into the abyss that was the emu's eyes, I felt only fear rushing over me. I heard the eruption of gunfire, the screams of every death inflicted by the hands of these beasts. I saw the chaos and destruction wrought at the beaks of these monstrosities and asked, God, why? Then Allie convinced me to feed the birds, and I guess we had an understanding from that point. So Allie pulled me away, and we looked at more alligators and wolves and whatnot. And then they offered to sell us one of the goats for $75.
He wants bread.
Yeah, he does want bread.
And you can go in there and play with him and stuff. Man, I'll roughhouse with him. I'll mess him up, roll him over on his back. He will literally doesn't give a shit. He'll jump back up, okay, pet me. Like, that's his reaction.
Now, we don't really frequent livestock auctions, so we reckoned that was a pretty good price for a goat.
Fuck it, let's take the goat.
You get the goat?
Yeah, let's buy this goat.
All right, $75, and I'm gonna load him up.
So we bought the goat and drove it home in the Beetle for around an hour while he screamed the whole time and pissed in my car. All in all, it was a pretty fun trip. I love Hot Springs. Good things happen when you go to Hot Springs. Sometimes you get to come home with a goat. And that's pretty cool.